to this morning session. The first speakers of the first session are there, seated. And first is Joel Wendland. Joel is from Michigan. Let me read his department. It's the Liberal Studies Department at Grand Valley State University in Michigan. He has already published a book, The Collectivity of Life, in Lexington Books, and also he is the author of various articles. Currently, he is working on a study which he says tentatively titled, that means the title may change, or he may change it, Racial Formation in Western Michigan. So his focus is on local culture and local population, and apparently. He teaches courses on intergroup dialogue, diversity in the US, the civil rights movement, immigration experiences, and on the theoretical work of activist and thinker Angela Davis. So his paper is entitled Formation to Systems Theory, Racism in American Culture and Society. So, Joe Wendland.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone.
You can speak from there.
Speak from there, okay. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Joel. I'm really happy to be here in Ankara to deliver this paper. This is my first time here, and hopefully not my last. So I'm going to talk about two theoretical formations related to racial formation and racism in the US context. And the first one is called racial formation theory, and I'm going to refer to it as RFT. And the second one is systemic racism theory, and I'm going to call it SRT. Okay? The publication in 2014 of both of the third editions of Racial Formation in the United States by Howard Omi and Michael Wynant, and Racist America by Joe Fagan. Both books are non-whites in U.S. society. In what follows, I will use interdisciplinary tools to sketch out the contours of RFT, using both the originating text by Omi and Wynant and a review of 5 methodological theoretical articles published in the Proceedings of the Modern Language Association. So my approach starts with sociology and then moves to a modern language association work which is more closely associated with English departments and literary studies, etc. In 2008, they published a special topic called comparative racialization, and they used Michael Omi and Howard Wynant's work on racial formation theory as the foundational text. And then I will, by comparison, examine discussions of systemic racism theory using a similar kind of study of a special issue of ethnic and racial studies in 2013. So that journal is published by an association that is closely connected to ethnic studies and other kinds of cultural studies departments. So in this paper, I'm starting with sociology, moving to I take as a given the disciplinary differences that shape the theoretical and methodological architectures of the research agendas of the multiple perspectives addressed in this paper. A study of those epistemological questions, that is, the alleged differences between positivism of the social sciences and the transformational qualities of the humanities, will have to wait for a different version of this paper. So I'm going to start with RFT, racial formation theory. The groundbreaking principles of racial formation theory lie in its emphasis on the centrality of race in understanding the development, social, political, cultural development of the United States. So racism and white supremacy are the key concepts, of key ways to understand how the US has developed, in contrast to traditional Marxist analysis that sees social class and capitalism and those economic structures as the foundational component. Secondly, the racial formation theory relies on the concept of racialization, a process of making human bodies into raced individuals or raced groups of people, and a recognition of race as a master category or a, quote, template within the US racial formation. So all of the ways that we understand social differences and differences in identities and the community identities according to racial formation theory is similar to or
sexuality in Jonathan Safran Foer's novel Here I Am. So Maria.
Dear professors, I am very honored by your attention. I have this opportunity to speak at this conference and to present my paper. I should say from the beginning that I'm a bit uneasy about certain language that is used throughout my presentation. I hope that you will not be offended about it. And I apologize from the beginning. So, Jonathan Safran Foer's inclination to try new grounds in fiction writing, challenge and stun his readers is well known and has been a recurrent tendency in both his previous novels, Everything is Illuminated, and in Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close. His latest novel, Here I Am, published last year, which is 11 years since the previous one, had been expected with excitement and cautiousness, and came out to very contrasting reviews. Here I Am continues many of the topics from the first two critically acclaimed novels, including Search for Ethnic Identity, The Holocaust Legacy, and individuals' response to mass violence. In many respects, the novel is defined by reflections on anxiety, which, as the author attempts to prove, dominates modern society, from patriarchal pressure within the family to a large-scale conflict in the Middle East. The novel's storyline follows a middle-class Jewish family from Washington, D.C., Julie and Jacob Blocks, and their 3 young sons. The central conflict is introduced when Julia finds her husband's secret cell phone that he used to sext, which is send messages of sexual nature, to his colleague, which then leads to the couple's separation and divorce. The tension between the two main characters is first introduced through isolated and at first unexplained lines of vividly sexual and vulgar nature that are likely to offend readers' sense of taboo. We are offered crude, indecent details that are perceived as even ruder because they appear as isolated sentences on the background of Julia's comments about her ideas on the design of an ideal home. It should be said that Foer has already turned to depictions of sexual intercourse in both his previous works. However, in Here I Am, such scenes are so explicit that they stylistically border on pornography, which is still quite unexpected in a mainstream novel and has made a few readers grit their teeth. The apparent message of the sequence mentioned above is correspondence between the notions of sexuality and power, as opposed to domesticity and submission, which is also a predominant way of approach to such narratives. That is, domestic and sexual labor are parallel because each ties woman to her relationships with men. Within Jewish American tradition, however, the concept of sexuality should be contextualized with a broader cultural and social currents. First of all, it is not uncommon to stereotype a minority ethnic group through its exaggerated sexuality. The idea that Jews differ sexually from Christians was already recorded in the ancient Mediterranean, where the Jews were referred to as the obscene people. Such stereotypes resurfaced over centuries, and together with a new wave of European anti-Semitism of the 19th century, found their way into the post-Civil War American terrain. In the late 1880s, writes Josh Lambert in Unclean Lips, Obscenity, Jews, and American Culture, the New York Society for the Suppression of Vice brought obscenity charges against Jews more frequently than against Catholics and Protestants combined. Even in the 21st century, this approach was able to appear in academic writing when in 2004 film critic Nathan Abrams claimed that, quote, secular Jews have played and continue to play a disproportionate role throughout the adult film industry in America. Obviously, Jewishness is simply not relevant in every representation of obscenity by Jews. But in certain cases, and in this paper I argue that Foer's novel is among them, sexual...
Yes, please.
My question, hello everybody, my question is to Joel. I was wondering what the racial formations theory, how that theory responds to mass incarceration and police brutality. As far as I can understand, they put the emphasis on the agency, as you said, instead of by kind of putting down the historical processes and yeah. So my question is that.
So that's a great question because it sort of gets at the critique that's systemic racism theory offers of racial formation theory. That because you're correct that RFT emphasizes agency. It doesn't deny the existence of massive incarceration and an unjust criminalization of African Americans, but it doesn't place an emphasis on that process and that particular system. Whereas systemic racism theory emphasizes the continuity between an era of mass incarceration and enslavement and Jim Crow. So it sees those three big periods in U.S. history as more continuous than distinct. But at the same time, it suggests it doesn't emphasize, it doesn't put forward the notion that people change social systems in the way that they do. So, so while it does offer an excellent critique of that very subject, systemic racism theory fails to address agency in appropriate ways. So, and racial formation theory emphasizes big discontinuities. So I would argue that mass incarceration as a concept is a reaction to the white supremacist reaction to the civil rights movement. It begins in the 1970s and it becomes a way that white society deals with the African American community, especially African American men. And I think racial formation is either slow or it doesn't adequately address that particular continuity, that particular reaction. But it is, but in other senses of the theory, mass incarceration is a racial project. It is a mode of racializing community of people.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Yes, Aisha, would you?
I noticed that you made a special effort, which I thought was on the part of political correctness, not to say other races, when you were comparing blacks versus other racial minorities. Is that just academic speaking, or were you just extra careful, or that's, I had a problem with that. I thought it was, you were being too nice. Is that true?
Perhaps, but I think also I would hesitate to label, out of historical fact and out of complexity, I would hesitate to label what are traditionally seen as racial groups as such, because of the way that the concept of race homogenizes, makes everyone the same in those groups. So if I refer to Asian Americans as a racial group, I put forward the dangerous notion that that is a single homogeneous group with a single experience, when in fact ethnicities within that sort of racial group are complex and different and have varied histories and various ways of coming to the United States and being, as Maria was talking about, being made a part of the United States and being racialized. So in some ways, yes, I think the answer to your question is yes, but I also, sort of my own sort of approach is to try to emphasize complexity rather than homogenizing groups. So, for example, Native Americans may be seen as a racial group in the United States, but the complexity of the various nations and tribes and sovereignties within that racial group are complex enough to, question that notion, I think.
Would the same be true for ethnic groups as well?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's, again, it runs the danger of a linguistic problem of trying to isolate each and every group, but I think in this context, I want to emphasize complexity.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone else? Perhaps in talking about racism in America, I think two very popular metaphors have been used but now dropped. One is, of course, was the melting pot, and then the other one, the salad bowl. And would you think that Trump has turned down, upside down, the salad bowl, and it's now, as you said, a very complicated issue? With respect to those two particular metaphors, I worry about the use of food metaphors to link to identities. But I think that Trump's particular ideological approach to how race should be organized in the United States is that white supremacy should reign, that other racial and
ethnic minority groups are inferior and should be seen as such. And I think he uses that in his language, in his policy, especially immigration policy, to not so subtly sort of return the United States to a white supremacist model. And I think in the past, even people like Ronald Reagan, who was a white supremacist in his own way, were capable of downplaying overt and explicit talk about race. They might be able to keep up the salad bowl metaphor that way. But this guy I don't think is interested in that in any way. I think he thinks that the way to achieve power on the conservative side of politics is to emphasize white racial identity and policies that favor white people. So, yeah, he's taking the salad bowl and throwing it out.
Yeah, okay. Yes?
Well, Joel, the issue of race is only present in American, current American political discourse, and also the social discourse, the media discourse. But it is also a big issue in American relations with the rest of the world. And the stigmatization of the racial tagging of countries is quite obvious in today's political discourse. We can see that in this question of visa, because it was raised yesterday, and where the United States is branding nations and let's say racial groups according to their ideological standing. Where some countries which are ideologically and politically close to the United States have been branded with the politically incorrect group of nations, and therefore their nationals have been somehow excluded, or at least have seen some restrictions as to the acquisition of the visa right to go to the United States. So how do you see this issue of race in its handling by the American political establishment with regard to America's relations with the rest of the world?
That's a great question too. I think that your description of how race operates in U.S. foreign policy and its relations to other parts of the world has a long history, and its long history is embedded in U.S. imperialism and neocolonialism. But I think today there's something different at work. I think if we look closely at, we don't even have to look that closely, but if we look at Trump's immigration policies, countries like Mexico are ideologically close to the United States, have long been an ally, friend, etc. of the United States. But his approach to migration from Mexico has been to demonize all Mexicans, all people living in the United States who are Mexicans, all legal and unauthorized immigrants in the United States who are Mexicans, and Central Americans in Guatemala, Panama, etc., as alien, as criminal, especially criminal. They're probably rapists, they're probably drug dealers, is what is almost a direct quote of what he has said. And that is translated into his policies about building a wall on the border and restricting access and intensifying deportation and detention of immigrants. And I think that has translated also into relations with other countries. So for example, I have a colleague in my department at home who is from India, and India is again a close ideological ally in a lot of ways to the United States, and has been. But his efforts to become a permanent resident of the United States have been stymied at every turn, and his legal assistance points to new policies that the Trump administration have put in place without much fanfare to make it harder, right? So, so he's Hindu, and he still experiences the same rights. So he doesn't fit into that category of people from the Islamic world. right? In those respects, which has been a big part of Trump administration refugee policy as well as immigration policy. But he's found that he has to get letters and support from world-renowned scholars saying that he is a world-renowned scholar if he wants to become a permanent resident of the United States. Whereas in the past, the recent past, it would have been a long and difficult process, but it wouldn't have been, you have to prove that you're the very, very, very best in the world to, teach here and work here. So I think those are new aspects. I think it's more closely affiliated in Trump's mind with racial identities, with cultural differences, with religious differences, and less so political and ideological or more Cold War era types of relationships than as it was in, say, the 1980s or 1990s. So.
Thank you very much. I think we have exceeded our time. Now it is coffee time, so thank you.
And ready to go. And this is the African American panel. And our first speaker today is Nisa Güzel Köşker. I will introduce each of our speakers before they speak, and then please leave your question and answer session to the last, and once we are all finished, we'll be all ready to take your questions if you would like to ask us something about the presentation. Okay, Nisa Güzel Köşker received her PhD in 2016 and her MA in 2008 from the Department of American Culture and Literature at Ankara University. She spent a year in the English department at the University of Pennsylvania, that was in the year 2011-2012, on a research scholarship granted by the Turkish Council of Higher Education for her doctoral dissertation on 19th century American women's writing. She has been teaching at Ankara University since 2006, and her research interests are American women's writing, American drama, cultural studies, and literary theory.
Thank you very much. My paper analyzes the presentations of archival passion for social documentation and forms of affect and sympathy in Harriet and Jacobs's Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. Based on a true story of bondage, Incidents is an autobiographical text. It's a slave narrative that subverts the popular 19th century ideology of domesticity and foregrounds the social history of the US. I argue in my paper that Jacobs contests the notion of ideal domestic sphere and the cultural morals of antebellum home life by exposing slavery's patriarchy. She portrays slavery as a disruptive element in American homes and in relation to the democratic and egalitarian ideals of the American nation, while proving the antebellum public-private dichotomy dysfunctional through conflating the strict borders between them. There exists in Jacobs' narrative a simultaneous line of exposition or an archival collection where she politicizes and publicizes the American home, the domestic space, and the nation. The domestic elements in the narrative operate as vehicles to unearth the fact that problems at home correspond to problems in the nation, whereby the nation becomes a larger domestic area. What makes Jacobs' autobiography distinctive is that her text is not only an account of her narrator Linda Brandt's life, but also a detailed account of the antebellum social scenery. Incidents centers on Linda's memories, her life and her social stories, her victimization in the hands of her master, Dr. Flint, her escape from slavery, and finally, her efforts to live as a free woman in the North. Incidents in Linda's life are organized in a way that illuminates the domestic sphere as a space of preservation and archive. It becomes clear in Linda's choice of incidents that the notion of home, which had been perceived to be an institutional foundation and a metonymy of the American nation since its early settlements, and which traditionally symbolized happiness and comfort, became a space of oppression for the enslaved people. The content of her narrative and her frequent emphasis on the image of home clarifies that her autobiography transforms the American household into a place where her life writing serves to reveal its secrets with an archival passion.
From the Department of American Culture and Literature in 2014, and she has recently completed her MA in our department, and I'm proud to say that I was her supervisor. She's continuing on with her PhD studies, and her fields of study include life writing, culture studies, African Americans, feminism, and gender studies. Ezgi.
The movement from self-hate to love and sisterhood. African-American feminists of Dolores and June Jordan's coalition politics promote necessity of love, kinship, and sisterhood among people. They reinterpret race, gender, and class-specific identity politics that trigger self-hate, prejudice, and distance among women based on difference. Lord and Jordan recreate transnational links and understanding between communities and nations. In that, Audre Lorde emphasizes the intersectionality of race, gender, and class concerns of white and African American communities by revealing interrelationship between internalized oppression, racism, sexism, and classism in women's lives. On the other hand, June Jordan indicates the transnational nature of human suffering and oppression, and thus calls for women's solidarity beyond the borders of nationality, culture, race, class, and heteronormative gender norms and roles. In Sexism, An American Disease in Blackface, Audre Lorde addresses black masculinity crisis in the African American community, which results from white essentialist cultural domination and the creation of deceptive codes of masculinity. African American men suffer from an unachievable standard of manhood as a result of historical race and class-given positionalities. In turn, instead of challenging white cultural hegemony, African American men stigmatize women's status concerning their disempowerment and symbolic emasculation. Moreover, Lorde criticizes communal myths and media representations of women that promote an enduring and loyal African American woman stereotype in the face of violent and prejudiced patriarchal society. She adds that white patriarchy presents a narcotic promise to African American men whose disillusionment with racism, lynching, and sexual violence charges oppress African American women. In the same light, African American feminist activist Frances Beale notes the vicious circle of delusional black masculinity and the resulting injustice against women. Beale states the misogynistic victimization of women who bear sexism, racism, poverty, and hostility. Quote, by reducing the black man in America to such abject oppression, the black woman had no protector and was used and is still being used in some cases as a scapegoat for the evils that this horrendous system has perpetrated on black men. Unquote. Regarding African American women's systematic oppression, the U.S. Department of Labor's The Negro Family, The Case for National Action, known as Moynihan Report in 1965, commented on African American women's roles as wives and mothers. The Moynihan Report defined an African American communal clash through myth-making and misrepresentations of women. The report notoriously claimed that African American women induced the failure of black communal and family union. According to that widely recognized and published analysis, strong African American women as wives, single mothers, and workers represented black matriarchy that reduced women into another stereotypical and biased position. Furthermore, the Moynihan Report turned women into scapegoats since they were blamed for the black masculinity crisis and communal problems, regardless of historical intersectionality of race, gender, and class concerns. In Don't You Talk About My Mama, June Jordan responds to racist cultural hegemony, and sexist African American critics sided with the Moynihan report. Jordan notes that there wouldn't be such concerns as black matriarchy and disintegration of black family if African American family did not shatter the ideal American family image, which legitimized white, patriarchal, and primarily male breadwinner middle-class family. Thus, such a mainstream argument creates another unachievable standard like black masculinity for African American community. Instead of discussing the existence and persistence of dominant race, gender, and class norms, it has been easier to overshadow the real motives by triggering the communal strive forward black female-headedness and its destructive outcomes. As Jordan also suggests, the problem is that women in general, and the black women in particular, cannot raise our children and secure adequately paying jobs because this is a society that hates women and that believes that we are replaceable, that we are responsible, ridiculous, irksome facts of life. American social and economic hatred of women means that any work primarily identified as women's work will be poorly paid, if at all. Concerning the debilitating life standards of African American community and the outreach directed to women, Jordan adds that women need to disown disparaging remarks about race and the replacement of men in the workplace and family. Quote, "We are not responsible for the systematic underemployment and unemployment of black men and women. We are not responsible for racial hatred of us. And we are not responsible for the American contempt of women per se." Unquote. Audre argues that media and community-given stereotypes, such as the black mammy and the black matriarchy, play an important role in the manipulation of the traditional gender roles for the benefit of the patriarchy. Black cultural expectations evoke submissive yet dedicated wives, mothers, and sisters who are deprived of self-love, power, and self-determination to shape their features. While the black mammy image is a continuation of the plantation-like liabilities and transforms antebellum slavery status into the post-bellum domestic roles, the black matriarchy often represents the vindication of African American men's powerlessness, emasculation, and misogynistic views of women. Therefore, African American women's experience is the epitome of community and culture-motivated self-hate and defeminization among women. To this sister outsiders,
The last person that stands between you and lunch. Hopefully. Oh, it doesn't. Well, you can see, that's just the title. I guess by now you know who I am. I am the faculty member and the chair of the Department of American Culture and Literature. And officially I have been working here since 1991, but my undergraduate years, if you count my undergraduate years, it has been much longer, so you can guess my age from there, I guess. Since 2000, I have published on a number of American culture and literary texts, but since 2011, 2010, 2011, I have been working on life writing in general. And today I'm going to talk about Bell Hooks and her group of works that I have over here. I just brought them so that you will see. I will be talking about these 4 books, which are sort of like a departure from her earlier works. These are like mostly self-help books, so to speak. Okay, so let me continue and let me try to assess these books as they have been received, or what I think of them. Bell Hooks' recent publications seem to offer a departure from her earlier critical and feminist, not her earlier feminist agenda, but at least a departure from her critical and feminist agenda of her earlier works. These books address the concept of love rather than the lack or misconceptions of the term in American culture, as the following titles suggest. And you can see the titles here. Okay, great, you can read those. All About Love, Salvation, Communion, The Will to Change, and When Angel Speaks of Love, that's a collection of poems. All About Love criticizes the culture of narcissism and self-love. Her remedies for changing the cycle of privileging work and money over love are to strengthen ties with one community, things to what you can do to strengthen your ties with your community, and to be true to those around. Salvation furthers the theme of the first book, focusing mainly on the Black experience and the collapse of community due to social and economical conditions. And she encourages the Black community to turn to love as a form of healing. Communion addresses the female search for love as the heroic journey. She argues that the feminist movement caused a shift in the understanding of women's experience, and that communion, heart-to-heart talk among female communions and lovers, gives a chance for healing. The Will to Change focuses on the fear of intimacy man faces in a patriarchal culture and on the necessity of getting in touch with one's emotional side. And When Angels Speak of Love, these are, as I said, a collection of poems that consists of 50 poems on love. Poems are not always about romantic love, but all evoke powerful personal emotions in some manner. I won't concentrate on her poems, since examining poetry, I believe, is a different form. I will just concentrate on the first 4 books over there a little bit more. Although the critic Cathy Glass believes that these texts, quote, effectively merit theory with a cogent analysis of America's ills, unquote, and that Hooks presents love that enables people to see that they are interconnected and interdependent, she also agrees that these books fall into the category of self-help books. Glass maintains that Hooks broadens the definitions of love by moving it, quote, beyond intimate and familiar contexts, unquote. Nevertheless, these books fall short on their promise of new visions because the formulations and suggestions for remedies are not new, but issues that are examined by previous thinkers, writers on the same subject. Thus, Hook basically repeats the former known formulations with a common audience in mind. This presentation, as I said, will focus on each of these books. In an interview, Hooks remarks that often death and war is associated with heroic journeys and conquering the domination as heroic deeds, while trying to understand and choose love is not viewed in the same category. She says this in an interview. Love, again she continues, she says, love is not openly discussed in the society, unlike the 1960s, because she says that in the 1960s, partially through the influence of counterculture movement, people discussed practices of love. She believes love is often viewed as a private affair between individuals, and thus its power to transform the community is eliminated. By centering love as the major theme in her books, she wants to examine love's transformative power and thus talks about its connection to spirituality. She actually has a series of articles on that, especially on Buddhism and how Buddhism is also connected with love, etc. In Road Less Traveled, Scott Peck defines love, which she likes to quote a lot, again, and I'm quoting from Scott Peck, as the will to extend one's self for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another's spiritual growth, unquote. This is also the working definition of love for Hooks. All About Love promises to deliver radical new ways to think about the art of loving, offering a hopeful and joyous vision of love's transformative power. Hooks starts her discussions with the definition of love because she believes that society has harbored misconceptions about love or how to love. How to love has not been taught, and often care and affection is confused with love. Babies respond to affection from their mothers or caretakers by cooing sounds, but care and affection is only one ingredient of love, she says. Love is a mixture of different ingredients, And she adds on to that care, affection, recognition, respect, commitment, and trust, as well as honest and open communication. Hooke continues to explain the concept of catexis, which means the process of investing feelings and emotions to the person of our interest. Quoting Scott Peck, Hooke repeats that individuals often confuse cateching with loving. Hooke then examines how abuses and dysfunctional relationships use love as an excuse for unwanted behavior. Abuse and power cannot coexist. To think that abusing partner, whether it's the parent or the lover or friend, is motivated to behave through feelings of love is a misconception. If human beings think of love as an action rather than a feeling, then accountability and responsibility will follow. Since feelings are often viewed as uncontrollable, viewing love as an action and a journey for better understanding of self and others will bring redemption. The following chapters of the book are titled, and I'm reading so you can guess the rest of it, Justice, Honesty, Commitment, Spirituality, Values, Greed, Community, Mutuality, Romance, Loss, Healing, and Destiny. As the reader can guess from these titles, these are necessary ingredients of love. Hooke talks about how the concept of love is formed during childhood in the families and how society and culture constructs love differently for males and females by giving examples from books, such as the famous book, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, and popular television programs. In her second book, Salvation, Hooke speaks of the importance of self-esteem for black children. She delves into the legacy of slavery, civil rights, liberation movements of the 1960s and 70s, personal and familial relationships to connect all these with the concept of love and the healing power. She claims, quote, the transformative power of love is the foundation of all meaningful social change, unquote. She refers to the sense of loss arising from the fractured family structures in black families today, while praising black women's ability to love despite all odds. Her remedy of redemptive love and spirituality, the formation, which has already been outlined in the previous book, is repeated to strengthen the ties in the community and rebuild the once lively black communities. Her extensive references to Martin Luther King, Cornel West, June Jordan, Zoe Neale Hurston, repeated twice. Elrich Cleaver and Eric Fromm provide her book with words of wisdom and healing for the environment. Her third book, Communion, The Female Search for Love, Hooke picks up the earlier idea of how females learn to love and search for love differently than men because they are born into a patriarchal world. Among the other books mentioned in this presentation, Communion draws on Hooke's personal experiences the most. In the preface, she also identifies the book as a testimony, and the text shows characteristics of testifying and bearing witness. Hooke acts as a witness to the events to show women's oppression in conjunction with the genre. She calls upon the readers to actively judge the situation. Similar to the first book, All About Love, Communion preaches the redemptive power of love. From the beginning, Hooke focuses on age and love with examples from her own family, the circle of friends, and how middle-aged women are interested in love because unlike the previous eras, women feel differently about aging and they are ready to claim real love after having learned from their previous experiences and mistakes. Thanks to the feminist movement and its teaching, women do not want to stay forever in unhappy marriages, she says. Hooke continues with her criticism of patriarchal norms, which are abusive not only for the females but also for the males, with examples from her parents' relationship, her father's domination, her Commonwealth marriage to an older male, eventually her choice of a much younger companion. This book also has sections on what is being discussed in feminist groups and examples from media images and popular culture products. After the trilogy, and those three books are often referred to as her trilogy, she then turns into Man, Masculinity, and Love, with the idea of the will to change. This book is actually written as a companion to another book titled We Real Cool, Black Man and Masculinity. So this is not her only book either. But she basically claims that male members of the society should not be afraid to embrace love because of its redemptive quality. In the preface, Hooks explains her aim as, quote, to know love, man must be able to let go the will to dominate. They must be able to choose life over death. They must be willing to change. In general, this book is also very similar to Communion, with a slightly different audience that are the males. In 12 short chapters, Hook examines the role of culture in forming manhood and sexuality, how men view sex as a self-solacing act because they want to release their own pain and are not interested in connecting to someone. As with her previous book, she criticizes popular culture products, such as Will Smith films like Man in Black and Independence Day for their patriarchal messages. For her, these films are not very different from Harry Potter books, which she also criticizes, by the way. She sees them as a schoolboy fantasies. Okay, so just to sort of, what are missing in these books? Hooks does not relate her observations or generalizations to other critical schools, which she has actually in the past. Although she talks about the power of patriarchal discourse and especially the masculine domination upon female members of the society, she does not acknowledge other critics like Foucault, who writes how sexuality is formed throughout historical discourses and how power relations are maintained through these discourses. Also, she does not mention other critical feminists who have actually spoken on similar subject matters from different angles, such as Julia Kristeva. Actually, after I wrote this paragraph, after I just had gone through that, I came across an article by Marilyn Edelstein that compares Julia Kristeva and bell hooks. Edelstein comments on how love becomes both an ethical and political foundation in both writers, which is a departure from love being equated with romance. She feels that very few feminist theories have advocated the ethical or political possibilities of non-sexual love, and both writers address love in such a manner. According to Edelstein, Hooks virtually reverses the usual association of politics with material needs and religion with spiritual needs, as she, quote, deconstructs typical Marxist and some feminist binary oppositions, unquote. This may be true for Hooks' previous works, because we know that she did write articles where she talked about postmodernism and how it could be used or as a tool for but basically she doesn't do it in these books. Okay, repetition, I'll just leave it there. Repetition, that's the other, so what are missing? Critical schools, reference to critical schools, we said, or other critical people. Repetition. These books are full of words of wisdom. As my slides earlier, if you have read, there are many words that you can basically underline or use or say or whatsoever. But the message is lost when the same idea is repeated over and over again. As I have tried to show, what is said in All About Love and Communion, it seems like, it's just, when you are reading them all, it seems like you are reading them again and again. So there is a lot of repetition in these books. Of course, it is necessary for understanding others, such as recognizing our interconnectedness, or maybe if you have not bought All About Love, maybe you bought Communion, so I guess it's okay if you do that, but if you read them back to back, there's a lot of repetition. She also talks a lot about religion and how love can be taught about religion, through religion, but she also emphasizes that religion can also be used as a tool for patriarchy. As I have also tried to show earlier, these books are also partial life narratives, because she gives very much extensive examples from her own experiences. She talks about her family, the effect of her grandparents and her parents' marriage, as well as her father's indifference, her love relationships, her observations, her illnesses. But talking about life writing, what it becomes, it turns all these generalizations into very subjective statements. So I think there's a problem there. Like if you're trying to write a self-help book based upon your experiences, then, I mean, besides the repetition, you also make it very subjective. And due to time limitations, I'll just skip examples of that. So basically what I'm saying is these books do not present a new vision, but merely repeat what other writers have been advocating throughout the decades. Her ideas are not different from other African American activist critics like June Jordan or Audre Lorde has said. In an interview, when the question was posed to her, what is the difference of your opinion of love? She answers, I think I bring together standpoints that are often not brought together. She names these standpoints as race, gender, and class. She continues with her observations of American society that is anti-intellectual and do not read much, which causes people to think in a narrow sense. She wants to broaden her message so that her books are accessible to a wide range of audience, stating that she wrote these books with a mass audience in her mind. Thus, these books can easily be classified as self-help books by her as well. She admits that she was writing self-help books. I view, again, once more, to come back to the beginning, I view these books as a departure from earlier works such as Feminist Theory, From Margin to Center, Thinking Feminism, Thinking Black or Yearning, Breaking Bread, which she co-authored with Cornel West. Hooks's previous books were also concerned with politics of race, gender, class, and culture, but in a much more provocative manner, which laid the foundations for intellectual debate. Sorry, just one more sentence, just touched it. It seems like she is writing the same book over and over again with words of wisdom from the array of intellectuals and writers, and that diminishes her concept of love ethic and her standpoint as a visionary feminist. Thank you. Okay, we are ready to take a few questions, all of us. Questions, comments? Okay, I guess we are all hungry, huh? Okay, well, thank you for our speakers then. And I would like to present attendance certificates.
Young scholars and colleagues. All of them are quite destined to become very popular, famous, or infamous with such topics and such interests, taking a look at their abstracts. First of all, Murat Ufukçeli is going to be presenting his paper. He is a PhD candidate at Bilkent University History Department. He completed his MA at Bilkent University in the field of American history. The subject of his MA thesis was American-Ottoman relations in the early 20th century, specifically the dollar diplomacy of President William Howard Taft. For his PhD dissertation, he plans on focusing on American diplomatic and economic initiatives in Turkey in the 1930s, which will illuminate how the US and Turkey became partners in the 1950s. The title of his talk today is The Battle of Love and Hate, the Decline of Fundamentalism in Democratic Party Politics after the Scopes trial. Yes, the floor is yours. Düğmeye basar mısınız?
Okay. Hello. Today I'm going to talk about the decline of fundamentalism in the Democratic Party politics after a dramatic milestone. It's also a part of my topic, as you can see, the battle of law and hate and its challengers. I'm talking about the state of Tennessee versus John Thomas Scopes. It was a legal case and commonly known as Scopes monkey trial. Briefly, the trial was a legal case happening in July 1925. A substitute high school teacher, John T. Scopes, was accused of violating Tennessee's Butler Act. This act made it unlawful to teach human evolution in any state-funded schools. The trial was deliberately staged in order to attract publicity in the small town of Dayton, Tennessee. National reporters flocked into Dayton, and two big-name lawyers agreed to represent each side, which turned the trial into a showdown, actually. William Jennings Bryan, three-time presidential candidate of the Democratic Party, argued for the prosecution, and Clarence Darrow, the famous liberal defense attorney, spoke for Scopes. The trial actually presented the fundamentalist modernist controversy in the society. However, in fact, it was more than that. The attorneys were representing the wings of the Democratic Party as well. In the end of the trial, Scopes was found guilty and fined for $100. In today's word, $1,300, and it's like a slap on the wrist. The media of the northern states declared a huge victory for Darrow, despite the loss in the court. After the trial, Bryan died of a heart attack. Unconvincing victory and the death of Bryan put a great damage to the fundamentalists in the Democratic Party. Bryan's type of fundamentalism was extremely popular among the Democrats so far, and it started to go down after 1925. Fundamentalist politicians of the Democratic Party started to be disfavored, and more progressive ones stepped up. Roaring Twenties in the American society, especially in the North, is illustrated as the modernity, progress, and liberty. People believe that any tension between science and religion had long been since resolved. However, evolution debates in the 1920s had roots among the fundamentalists. As I told before, it was in the education as well.
Questions and answers at the end, after the presentations, since it reflects to the curricula discussions in Turkey at the moment. Our second speaker this afternoon is Şükra Eda Marangos. She is an EFL teacher at the Turkish American Association in Ankara. She received her BA from Hacettepe University, Department of English Translation and Interpretation, and she is currently an MA student at Hacettepe University's American Culture and Literature Department. The title of her talk is The Case of Sacco and Vanzetti, From Hatred Anarchists to Two Good Men. The floor is yours.
Thank you for your kind introduction. Hello everyone. Memories fade, people die, but the feelings and emotions they made us feel last forever, like the lessons they taught us and ideas they left behind. In this aspect, I remember the famous quote from Alan Moore's V for Vendetta and want to share those powerful lines with you too. There, did you think to kill me? There is no flesh or blood within this clock to kill. There is only an idea, and ideas are bulletproof. Alongside being so powerful, these lines are also very soothing against the injustices of life and irrecoverability of the death. That's why I wanted to start to tell the story of Nicola Sacco and Bartolomeo Vanzetti with these lines, because their story did not end with the execution of these two men. On the contrary, the execution turned the trials into a study area and the case into a public affair. Also, it led the case to be a cause celebrate, an epitome of injustice in American judicial system, and a material of popular culture. As Herbert Ehrman stated, the case marked the history as being the case that will not die. And the case has become a striking example of love and compassion coming out of hatred and prejudice. The underlying reason of its being so famous was that the controversy it sparked and divided American nation because the case brought out the central issues and tensions of the era, such as immigration, labor activism, radicalism, the Red Scare, anti-immigrant sentiments, and patriotism. Before starting to tell the story of these two men, please do not forget that everybody is special. Everybody. Everybody is a hero, a lover, a fool, a villain, everybody. Everybody has their story to tell. In my journey to understand the Sacco and Vanzetti case, I encountered with various descriptions for these two men, such as two Italian immigrants, two Italian working men, a good shoemaker and a poor fish peddler, two anarchist bastards, and lastly, two good men. Even these descriptions are good enough to reveal the central tensions of the era and the problems arising from the case. The adjectives used to describe these men are either positive or completely hateful, but in general, they underscore the reasons underlying behind their political thoughts, being poor, Italian, anarchist, and a member of working class. Thus, Sacco and Vanzetti's ethnic identity and class politics designated their relationship to American society. In total, it can be said that American experience of these two men were not exceptional. On the contrary, these experiences transformed their ordinariness into extremity and linked their fates. With America's entry into World War I, a wave of xenophobia, crime, nativism, and patriotism swept the country. In this aspect, the year of 1917 is quite important, not only because of America's entry into the war, but also it was the year that Sacco and Vanzetti met in Boston and became anarchists in Galleanist movement. Even though this movement supported to employ every means of violence against the dual evils of capitalism and state, in cultural productions, the anarchist background of these men is shown as limited to only a philosophical level in an attempt to make them look less radical. However, The advocacy of violence was not merely rhetorical in this movement, and Sacco and Vanzetti were committed revolutionaries. There were lots of bombing events carried out by anarchists under the leadership of Galliani as a retribution, which were also named as Palmer raids. And unfortunately, these two men were also aware of these events. Since every action causes an equal and opposing reaction, it is also needed to question the motives of revenge of this movement, and particularly of these men. In the xenophobic environment of 1920s, anarchist threat of violence was regarded as dangerous as global terrorism today. Nevertheless, this anti-radicalism movement did not prevent the global protest sparked by the Sacco and Vanzetti trial. However, the hostile atmosphere of the US against radicals was not a coincidence. It was an ongoing period of
Two good men a long time gone. Two good men a long time gone. Sacco and Vanzetti are gone. They left me here to sing this song. Sacco was born across the sea, somewhere over in Italy. Vanzetti born of parents fine, drank the best Italian wine. Sacco sailed to sea one day, landed up in the Boston Bay. Vanzetti sailed the ocean blue and landed up in Boston too. Two good men's a long time gone. Two good men's a long time gone. Two good men's a long time gone. Left me here to sing this song.
Okay, so this is how their story started. As seen in the song, Sacco and Vanzetti were praised with their work in the cultural productions and mostly depicted as the martyrs of proletariat. Although they were opposing to the institution of religion, it can be said that such a praise or their saint-like depictions might have challenged their ideologies. Furthermore, with the increase in the number of such cultural productions, the case enlarged its target by attracting widespread mainstream attention. In this sense, famous folk singer Woody Guthrie's success in ballads of Sacco and Vanzetti can be called into question, but his attempts to make these men memorable through ballads and to emphasize the importance of unionism regardless of different ideologies and ethnicities were quintessential parts of his work. If the tale the ballad tells is worth the telling, the tune makes very significant difference, said Guthrie, and always underlined that the words, not the music, matter in a song. Thus, in his album called Ballads of Sacco and Vanzetti, the story of two Italian immigrants stand out rather than its musical value. The trial, conviction, and execution of Sacco and Vanzetti were mentioned in these songs. Guthrie called his album as the most important dozen songs I have ever worked on. Even though his efforts to underscore the cultural significance of the case, his Dust Bowl ballads were much more praised compared to his Sacco and Vanzetti project. Since the time of composing Dust Bowl ballads and ballads of Sacco and Vanzetti overlapped, the resemblance of Italians to O'Keeffe was also touched by Guthrie in his notebook. Differently from the description of rugged individualists of the old school, Guthrie added a layer of class consciousness to O'Keeffe in his songs. These O'Keeffes were depicted as outsiders since they were displaced and sent to California by leaving joblessness, ecological devastation, and financial disasters behind at home. Similar to the migration of Sacco and Vanzetti, O'Keeffes were looking for better conditions in the city too. However, like the Italian immigrants, they were subject to scapegoating and treated inhumanely. Again, like immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe, the poor O'Keeffes also stirred up hatred, which led to anti-migrant campaigns. Since their plight was similar, Sacco and Vanzetti were depicted as simple working men, not so different from Oklahoman farmers forced from their land and turned into a real problem in the city. Ballads of Sacco and Vanzetti were recorded in 1947 and released in 1963. Although the trials extended over 7 years from 1920 to 1927 and dealt with the first Red Scare, after almost 20 years from the execution, the United States was going through a similar period in which communists were blacklisted, and in the following years, many ethnic groups and women started to riot for their civil rights. Guthrie's uttermost intention in composing such songs was to make historical ballads, providing documents of the case and trials, such as Vanzetti's and Sacco's letters. Till the time when these ballads were composed, many leading figures have produced various artistic and cultural productions concerning the Sacco and Vanzetti case. So Upton Sinclair's documentative novel Boston, Maxwell Anderson's play Winterset, Howard Fest's The Passion of Sacco and Vanzetti, Henry Harrison's The Sacco and Vanzetti Anthology of Verse, and John Dos Passos' Facing the Chair, Sacco and Vanzetti can be given as examples to these productions. Like in all cultural and artistic productions, ballads of Sacco and Vanzetti are not individualistic either. On the contrary, they have a communal nature. Guthrie addresses the problems of new immigrants and their shattered dreams after their arrival in the US. He describes Sacco and Vanzetti's encounter with the city life in his notebook as it follows. You saw faces against walls, an eye gone, an ear missing, no teeth, open boils, sores of the sieve, and you heard that there was no known cure. There was no cure known. And the words whirled and spun around in your head. No cure known. No cure for the people, no cure for the streets. Another communal element of the ballads is the emphasis upon the importance of unionism. Guthrie tried to find a common ground among Sacco and Vanzetti and himself. In mainstream American culture, they all represented the marginalized and the oppressed. Thus, he built a relationship between Aukies and these Italians and supported to build a big brotherhood under the roof of unionism. Until the folk revival years of 1960s, an adult audience was appealed to folk music. With the rise of baby boom generation and their consumerist lifestyle, folk music also went through a period of development and experimentation. In this aspect, Woody Guthrie's musical agenda was always based on promoting labor unions, civil rights, economic justice, and world peace. In the 50s, he also expanded his fame even to Britain. However, despite the huge expectation of Guthrie, the Sacco and Vanzetti project did not become as successful as he imagined. While composing these ballads, he referred to the folk song's ability to evoke community and solidarity, to bring back the past and to capture nostalgia, and to cure the soul and generate hope in an era swept by the Second Red Scare. With the release of his Sacco and Vanzetti project, he endeavored to revive the spirit of solidarity among people all over the world, which was passionately promoted with the protests approximately 40 years ago to free these two innocent Italian men from the unjust ruling of the court. In this aspect, it can be said that he aimed to remind people of the need to take action as it happened in the 20s and to destroy the atmosphere of suspicion and mistrust in which hundreds of writers, directors, and actors were blacklisted and judged because of their ideologies. Well, the world shook harder on the night they died than it was shaken by that great world war. More millions did march for Sacco and Vanzetti than did march for the great war lords. In this verse taken from The Flood and the Storm, it can be seen that the spirit of solidarity after the execution was also rekindled to the masses. You souls of Boston, bow your heads. Now two most noble sons are dead. Where the people's army marches now to fight, Sacco and Vanzetti will give us light. And in this part taken from You Souls of Sun, a call for action under the light of Sacco and Vanzetti affair was declared by Guthrie again. According to the fundamental characteristics of ballads, Through the simplicity of their structure, style, and diction, personal or a specific subject can be transformed into an issue of humanity. In this aspect, the selection of the case of Sacco and Vanzetti is quite crucial because it bears universal significance and left a blot on American history. Nevertheless, it can be said that Guthrie a little bit romanticized these men as moral heroes, like it happens in other productions. He said in Root, Hog, and Die that they've never done a wrong in their lives, so it's a little bit romanticized, right? Overall, the trials which divided American nation and galvanized artists, writers, singers, and actors to take action against the ruling of the court ended with the execution of these men. Despite their exoneration in 1977 by the governor of Massachusetts, historians continue to debate over the innocence and guilt of these men. Even though millions believed passionately the innocence of these two men, they were executed with the charge of robbery and murder. And despite the lack of evidence, the lies of Sacco in the initial police interview were regarded as consciousness of guilt by the authorities. Despite all that, it was widely accepted that they couldn't have the chance to get a fair trial, and their death made it unable to pluck the truth from obscurity. Thus, Guthrie's 10 ballads are quite important to shed light on the history and make these men immortal. Although the chances of learning the truth diminished over time, the ballads showed that only love survived out of all the ambiguity and the idea embraced by these two men, and finally, lessons their story taught us. I would like to finish my presentation with a quotation from Ursula Le Guin's Dispossessed. It is our suffering that brings us together, it's not love. Love does not obey the mind and turns to hate when forced. The bond that binds us is beyond choice. We are brothers. We are brothers in what we share. In pain, with each of us must suffer alone. In hunger, in poverty, in hope, we know our brotherhood. We know it because we have had to learn it. We know that there is no help for us but from one another. There is no hand will save us if we do not reach out our hand. And the hand that you reach out is empty as mine is. You have nothing. You possess nothing. You own nothing. You are free. All you have is what you are and what you give. So thank you so much.
Illuminating paper. Our third speaker is Burak Yemenici. He works as an EFL teacher at the Turkish American Association in Ankara. He received his BA from Hacettepe University, Department of American Culture and Literature in 2016 and is currently an MA student at Bilkent University History Department, where he specializes in American history. The title of his talk today is Fighting for Peace in the 50s, Pete Seeger's Struggle Against Hatred. The floor is yours.
Hello everyone. Today I'm going to talk about the story of an amazing musician, a social activist, and a very inspiring person from the recent history of the United States. I'm talking about Pete Seeger. And what I'm going to talk about is his lifelong struggle against hatred, inequality, and discrimination. Although Seeger once particularly said that he had fought for peace in the 50s, in fact, he dedicated his entire life to spread peace and love with his music. Music was always a significant part of Pete Seeger's life as the son of two musician parents. And thanks to his father, he didn't grow up distant from the political discussions of the day either. Therefore, when he went to Harvard, it didn't take long for him to be involved in the American Student Union, and from there to the Young Communist League. To Seeger, it was very simple. I was against race discrimination, and communists were against race discrimination. I was in favor of unions, and communists were in favor of unions. As a part of the band, the Almanac Singers, in the early 40s, they aimed at building a singing labor movement by reviving the tradition of singing in union gatherings. They joined in union strikes, gave concerts, and soon their popularity exceeded the borders of the unions. However, towards the late 1940s, with the emergence of the Cold War, things started to go downhill. All labor unions were taken under close monitoring because the government suspected that the communist ideology had taken over the union movements. With the enactment of new labor management acts in 1947, the government took serious measures on weakening the labor unions. In a way, the unions were forced to dismiss their dangerous members, in other words, communists. Since those dangerous members of the unions were, as Pete Seeger says, the most enthusiastic as singers and songwriters, their attempt on reviving a singing labor movement faded away. The government intervention in the unions was only the beginning of a serious period of witch hunt that will last several years and ruin the lives of countless of people. It was Red Scare. The year 1947 can also be marked as the beginning of a new wave of Red Scare around the United States. And Pete Seeger was definitely pointed as a target, as one of the targets maybe. While the Speaker of the House, Joseph Martin, openly said that there was no room in the government of the United States for any who preferred the communistic system or any other form of absolutism to their own American system, Pete Seeger was singing, Yankee, Russian, white or tan, a man is just a man. We are all brothers and we are only passing through. While the war hawks were chanting on streets that the only good communist was a dead communist, Pete Seeger and his new band, the Weavers, did their best to carry on under such a politically intolerant atmosphere. Until the Red Scare hit them hard, the Weavers was indeed a big hit. They were at the top of the charts. Their songs were sung and played all over TVs and radios. They were taking stage in the biggest concert halls of major cities, and Pete Seeger's personal popularity was also increasing with each concert. He was playing his banjo, on which was written, "This machine surrounds hate and forces it to surrender," and singing what he called all love songs, while the Red Scare practices were instilling fear and hate into the minds of people as a means of social engineering. People's loyalty to American values were questioned, and their ideologies were interrogated by the House Un-American Activities Committee. Many people stigmatized as un-American were blacklisted. And those blacklisters came out with a blast against the Weavers, just as they were offered a weekly TV show. The band had just signed the contract for the TV show when the main sponsoring company suddenly gave up. The TV show was cancelled even before being broadcast. Suddenly their songs were not heard on radios that often anymore. Soon they were all gone. Neither the band members could be seen on TV anymore, nor could their songs be heard on radios at all. It was clear that Pete Seeger and his band, the Weavers, were blacklisted. They, just like that, became evil commies from once hot commercial properties that caught everybody's attention in the industry. And, let me go back, one of the members of the band, Ronnie Gilbert, said that we lost our livelihood, we lost our careers, and we lost much more than that. We lost the sense that we were living in a democratic society. Interestingly enough, the Weavers was the only musical band to be blacklisted during the Red Scare period. But nobody in the music industry could stand up against this because everybody was scared that they could end up being labeled Reds as well. As years passed, Unfortunately, things didn't get any better for Seeger and his band. Furthermore, in 1955, Pete Seeger was called by the House Un-American Activities Committee for a hearing to question his ties with the Communist Party and his approach towards the ideology itself. Seeger, of course, didn't answer any of those questions asked. He said, "I'm not going to answer any questions as to my associations, my philosophical or religious beliefs, or my political beliefs, or how I voted in any election, or any of these private affairs," he said. When he was asked about his previous appearances in union gatherings, his response was that, "I have sung before all kinds of people, of all religions, of all political faiths, and I challenge your rights. These questions are improper," he said. In the hearings, Pete Seeger didn't admit being a communist, but he didn't refuse it either. He publicly challenged HUAC and questioned their rights to ask these questions. He also refused to take the loyalty oath. As a result, the committee found him guilty of refusing to answer their questions. In 1962, 7 years after he was declared guilty by the HUAC, the appeals court acquitted Seeger of the charges. The same year, Pete Seeger hit the roads. He traveled across the nation, college to college, and from there to the rural parts of Georgia for his first concert within the civil rights movement. He took part in protests, gave concerts shoulder to shoulder with the civil rights activists. Later, he openly opposed the Vietnam War. In gatherings, protesters chanted his anti-war songs, such as "Where Have All the Flowers Gone," "Bring Them Home," and "Waist Deep in the Big Muddy." And I would like to play some parts of those songs to you now.
Gone to graveyards, everyone. When will they ever? So you look for the warriors in Vietnam. Bring 'em home, bring 'em. Waist deep, neck deep, soon even a tall man will be over his head. We're waist deep in the big muddy, big Sister John.
And that big fool was LBJ, no doubts. In the song "Bring Them Home," at one part Pete Seeger says, "There is one thing I must confess, I'm not really a pacifist. If an army invaded this land of mine, you'd find me out on the firing line. Though he was heavily criticized by aligning himself with the enemy, he could bravely state that the American forces in Vietnam were the invaders themselves, not the patriots. And that third song, "Waist Deep in the Big Muddy," had another different significance. After being kept off broadcast televisions for almost 17 years, in the first TV program that Seeger appeared, he sang that song, anti-war song, "Waist Deep in the Big Muddy." Not surprisingly, the program was immediately censored and the song was cut. Many further examples can be given, but long story short, Pete Seeger continued to disturb the authorities during the 50s, the 60s, and later on as well. He never gave up using his machine and his words to challenge wars, hate, discrimination, and inequality of all kinds. He once said that music isn't just an attempt to make life livable. It's true that it's one of the purposes of music, help you survive your troubles, help you forget your troubles, but some music helps you understand your troubles. Some music can help you do something about your troubles. And at that time, music was about speaking out. Music was about resistance. Yes. His own version of the old gospel tune, "We Shall Overcome," became the anthem of the civil rights movement. He had originally heard the song from striking tobacco workers in North Carolina in the 40s, and he made some changes to that old gospel, added some verses to it, and made it known by a whole nation. It became the anthem of the civil rights movement. "We Shall Overcome" evolved from just being a song to a ritual where the audience would stand, lock their arms, and sway all together as they sang. We shall overcome someday. We'll walk hand in hand someday. Deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. A good song reminds us what we are fighting for, Seeger once said. And with this song, he reminded people that as long as they stick together, they could fight against almost anything. And maybe not today, not tomorrow, but someday they shall overcome. And Pete Seeger's story taught us that as long as there is love and hope, hate and fear will always be overcome. It doesn't matter what you're fighting against. It doesn't matter what you're intending to overcome. It's a universal struggle. Those African American tobacco workers in North Carolina, they were thinking about overcoming the sheriff of the town. The civil rights movement activists all around the United States were thinking about overcoming the whole system of segregation. Somewhere around the world, different people in different countries had different things on their minds to overcome when they sang this song with Pete Seeger. And I know, and you know also, that we all have some things in our minds, things that we should overcome. And I'm sure that even right now, you might be thinking about it. And I know that for sure, that as long as we walk hand in hand, we shall overcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this beautiful paper illustrating the power and the capabilities of music. Yes, we have ample time. The floor is open for questions, comments. Yes, can you jump?
No questions, but a couple of things for all three. I would like to thank all three of you because you brought out to our attention three important aspects of American literature, life and culture. Those two infamous cases which reflect the fact that justice is blind. And you mentioned Willie Guthrie, who is one of my idols, who's followed by Pete Seeger. These names, these events are part of American folklore, American culture, and their contribution is beyond great. And I am speechless because three young academics wrote this for the first time. I attended quite a number of conferences, but this is the first time I heard three young scholars referring to events and figures in American life which are of utmost importance. So I would like to thank you from the bottom of my heart. That's the first. One of the loves of my life is Pete Seeger. And there is another song which brings us to Nazım Hikmet. He read a poem by Nazım Hikmet, his Hiroshima poems, and he has a song, I Come and Stand at Every Door. So if you're interested in Pete Seeger, that song is beautiful and brings tears to your eyes. So thank you all three.
I
really appreciate what you have done so far. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you for all of your presentations, and my questions to congratulate you. Are there any singers or bands in our time or after Pete Seeger you know of that inspired openly from him?
Well, yeah. Actually, the two names that I can think of right now is Bob Dylan and Bruce Springsteen.
And John Baez.
Yeah, John Baez, yeah.
John Baez.
Actually, Peter, Paul and Mary.
Yeah, Peter, Paul and Mary, yeah.
Peter, Paul and Mary, Phil Oakes.
Yeah, Phil Oakes, of course. Yeah. Yeah, they just carried on where he left off, and yeah, still.
I guess I should say a few words, sorry. I'm also proud that my class that we have took has contributed very much. And thank you, Eda, and thank you, Burak, and I hope you in folk music. We are still carrying on that torch in our classes. So if any of you are interested in, please take the American music class.
But yes, seriously.
Seriously. We even sing we shall overcome together.
Yeah, I remember that our first class.
I would add Rage Against the Machine to the list because they're famous for singing pretty messy songs as well. But I have a question for Murat about the role of racism in the narrative you're telling. What is, in your mind, the connection between fundamentalism in the late 19th and early 20th century and the Democratic Party's support for white supremacy in the South, for disjoining of economic populism from questions of racial equality?
I can say that they were quite connected. These things are quite connected to each other. I mean, Brian was representing kind of fundamentalism. He never represented any kind of racism, but they were very close terms. And I think the Democratic Party has to overcome with such kind of discriminative terms in the late 1920s, and by promoting other choices like Roosevelt, Al Smith, they also tended to promoting some they are trying to promote some people who don't like this kind of terms. So I don't know what to say.
Yes. Other comments, questions, additions? Oh, we still have time. This rarely happens. We also have to congratulate them on their punctuality. They were spot on in timing. Amazing. With strict chairs.
You didn't mention John Baez's song of Saka and Mazetis. Have you come across that as well?
Yeah, I have come across, but I prefer to use Woody Guthrie's version because it's the earlier version. That's why I chose Woody Guthrie.
Okay, any other comments? Well, perhaps you can chat with the young scholars over coffee or tea. I would like to congratulate them on behalf of the conference organizers and personally. And I would like to
Culture and Literature at Hacettepe University for inviting me. It's always great to be with friends, and this is my home. It's my alma mater, so I'm proud to be here. And the fourth session this afternoon is on love and hate in Mexican America. And we have three speakers, and I'd like to start with the first speaker. She works as an English instructor at TOBB University of Economics and Technology in Ankara, Turkey. She received her BA and MA from Hacettepe University's Department of American Culture and Literature. and she's currently a PhD student in the same department. Her research interests include feminism, masculinity, and contemporary American theater. Today she will be talking to us on Mexico in Dreams, Mexico in Reality, Love, Hate, and the Deterritorialization in Jessica Abel's La Perdida. Dr. Basha. She's not yet without video.
I hope you can see me. The history of the United States, which promises liberty and equality to everyone, regardless of their racial, ethnic, or religious identity, is replete with tragedies caused by the alienation of the other. Native Americans, African Americans, Asian Americans, Jews, or Mexican Americans have suffered from the identity politics of the country, and they have been forced to adopt to the American way of living politically, socially, and culturally. Unfortunately, even if they accept assimilation and try to be a part of American nation, members of these communities are still subjected to racism because of their skin color, accent, or ethnic background. Therefore, the literature of these communities is based on their identity crisis, which results from belonging to and not belonging to two cultures at the same time. In La Perdida, Jessica Abel approaches to the issue of ethnic other from a different perspective by portraying the identity crisis of Carla, as you can see here, who grew up as a privileged middle-class American. As the title suggests, Carla is a lost girl who was raised by her American mother in the United States and is thus estranged from her Mexican roots. Her father is Mexican. It is argued that no one is born with an essential identity. Identities are produced and they make sense, they have meaning, only in the cultural context of their production. Accordingly, Carla does not feel comfortable with her identity as she is not familiar with the culture of her other half. Therefore, believing that learning about Mexico and experiencing the culture will help her complete identity, she decides to travel to Mexico. She states that, "I thought that I went because I was sick of the USA, sick of everybody. I wanted to find my Mexican roots. However, not only the first arrival to a place may result in a recollection of or encounter with past experiences or perceptions. In La Perdida, Carla goes to Mexico to embrace the culture that she rejected as a child, and she does her best to reconnect to her Mexican roots. However, not only is she never accepted by the residents of the country, but she is also discriminated against because she is basically an elite American tourist there. The way Carla tries to stick to her history in Mexico can also be exemplified by the affect theory. Affect is the name we give to those forces that can serve to drive us toward movement, toward thought and extension. Moreover, Sarah Ahmed, who defines affect as what keeps our connection between ideas, values, and objects, focuses on happiness. She claims that happiness functions as a promise that directs us towards certain objects. Such objects accumulate positive, affective value as they are passed around. In other words, we move toward and away from objects through how we are affected by them. Carla's connection with Frida can be explained with the effect of objects.
Move on to the next speaker and have the questions at the end. But before I introduce her, I have an announcement to make, which I should have made in the beginning of the session. I'm sorry, Professor Merdan Tanrısal asks all the participants to stay for a while after this session is over because there's going to be a group photograph taken in this hall, right? In this hall, not in the other one. So please stay for a while for the photograph. Thank you. Our next speaker is Gül Varlı Karaaslan, who graduated from Başkent University's Department of American Culture and Literature in 2007 where she now works as a research assistant. She completed an MS degree at Ankara University's Department of Gender and Women's Studies in 2010, and an MA degree in British Cultural Studies at Hacettepe University's Department of English Language and Literature in 2016. She's currently pursuing her PhD degree in American Culture and Literature at Hacettepe University. Her main interest areas are women's literature and modern drama. Gül will today talk to us about representations of food and love in Deniz Chavez's A Taco Testimony.
Regional and ethnic culinary traditions and cuisine cultures have become part of American culture, which also resulted in commodification of Mexican food culture and mass production of Mexican food, including tacos. The U.S. serves the food by combining and blending the food traditions. As a result, flavored with a filling such as Korean barbecue, sausage, or tofu, tacos are evolved into an international food. So, tacos are evolved into an international food, and its ethnic value is disregarded. Though everyone loves tacos, as we can see in our of the advertisements around on the web, the cultural legacy of the food is diminished with its representation in popular culture. And in order to manipulate this false representation, food becomes a dominant cultural marker in Chicano literature, functioning as a bridge to manifest female experience across the borders. Deniz Chavez's novel, A Taco Testimony, Meditations on Family, Food, and Culture, is a life narrative in which the writer narrates her relation with her mother and Mexican culture through food and cooking. In this respect, tacos function as a vessel for Chavez to come to terms with her Chicana identity and to navigate her relationship with her mother. Thus, the mother's expression of love through tacos gives the author an understanding of Chicana cultural heritage. The mother's food, in this respect, becomes a legacy that supplies the necessary ingredients for self-expression. In the book, tacos are essential for the survival of family history and celebration of ethnic legacy. For Chavez's family, tacos are exceptional food that provides healing, enables reunion, and protects Mexican identity. The writer also provides an alternative way of reading for female experience in Chicano context by depicting how food politics function. This paper aims to analyze how food contributes to the writer's expression of love and hate in familial and ethnic relations within the framework of Chicano political agenda. In the work, tacos and taco table become central pieces through which the mother manifests her love and care for. There have been other times when tacos and the love of family have saved my life. As anyone knows, tacos can cure you if you have a cruda, a hangover of any kind. They can soften your sadness, ease the pain, and set the brokenness in your back on the bed, where it can rest a while and then go to sleep like an overheated, petulant child. A child that doesn't know how deeply it is hurting itself. Amen, I say. Amen. So it's some kind of a ritual for her to cook and consume tacos. Food preparation embodies gendered knowledge and it is a spiritual activity as well as a physical one. Thus, the narrator is healed through the process of rolling tacos, as she feels the existence of her mother and reunites with her through cooking. In order to explain food's relationship with power, Sidney W. Mintz applies two terms to define the global and local perception of food, which are the outside meaning and inside meaning. Sidney defines the inside meaning of food as the meaning attached to it in daily life, in local communities, for ordinary people. The inside meaning of food has social significance in a shared cultural system. Accordingly, when Chicano women write about food, the food becomes a symbol for relating gender relationships and politics. So cooking is an act that goes hand in hand with the process of writing for Chicana writers. Diana Ribeldo uses the term writers as cooks, as in her words, writing is one way to express individual subjectivity as well as reinforcing this female identity as someone who cooks, especially for Chicana writers. In other words, Chicana writers function as a cook who purposefully transmits Chicana oral tradition to written form by cooking the text. Chavez in the book reflects the connection with tacos and her artistic expression by uttering, "The story of tacos is my owning of the story," and tacos become integrated part of creative identity. The inside meaning of taco creates the meditation that provides personal and communal healing, and being the cook enables the writer to reform herself. Moreover, in Taco Testimony, the writer not only empowers female performativity, but also foregrounds her ethnic concerns through the representation of food and kitchen space. Critics claim that Delfina's tacos raised Dennis Chavez's political consciousness as a Chicana, writing food is adapted as a voice to speak about gender, class, and ethnic barriers. Accordingly, the writer shares her concerns about borderland society who lives under harsh economic conditions through sharing recipes and memoirs. Un taco de sal and dog food tacos, she gives recipes for tacos filled with either salt or dog food. A Woman in an Opera, a suburb and border crossing near Juarez, was stopped by Mexican officials and questioned about her frequent trips back and forth. She informed the integrators that she had been buying American dog food to feed her family. According to her, American dog food was better than Mexican dog food because of its vitamins and nutrients. Also, American dog food really spread well, she added. So the story is I think, strong story that through the recipe, the writer is able to reflect her concerns about class and poverty in the Mexican border. Although Dennis Chavez, with her pen, revisits her personal memoirs and subverts the outer meaning of food by creating an emotional, cultural, and political attachment to food. Tacos provide her spiritual nourishment, and A Taco Testimony also reflects how food becomes an important vehicle of expression for redefining mother and daughter relationships. Through food writing, Chavez puts an effort to redefine her relationship with her mother and motherland. By centering taco and taco making in the text, she ensures that the relationship between her and her mother still continues. The mother's recipes are emphasizing her story, become bridges, uniting the life experience and stories of each woman. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Gülvali Karaslan, for that very interesting paper. Our last speaker for this session is Santiago Vaquera Vasquez. And he is an unrepentant border crosser, ex-DJ, Keeps coming back, doesn't it? Chicano writer, painter, and academic. An associate professor of creative writing and Hispanic Southwest literatures and cultures in the Department of Spanish and Portuguese at the University of New Mexico, Albuquerque. He's recently back in New Mexico after a year as a Fulbright senior lecturer at Pajajera University here, and also in Europe. He's a member of the research group UC Mexicanistas. Is that safe? And author of 4 collections of short stories. Forgive my pronunciation. Algún día te cuenta las cosas que te he visto. Luego el silencio. One day I'll tell you the things I've seen. That was easy. And a los Stefan. His most recent work is a co-edited anthology of scholarly writing, the Latino Midwest Reader, which came out in 2017. Santiago?
Thank you. I'm going to turn on my stopwatch because I wrote a lot, and so I'll need to know when to stop. First off, I would like to thank you all for coming out. I'm really happy to see students and former students of mine here in the audience. I'm really happy to be back. Those of you who follow me on Facebook and Instagram know my particular migration. That was very odd to get here. But I was happy to say that I got to see 2 days of the Republic of Catalonia. And I was there for the birth and the demise, unfortunately. And I also got to have an interesting lecture by a Turkish consular agent at the Turkish consulate in Barcelona. And I would also like to thank Assad for always bringing me back. This is actually my 10th year of speaking at these conferences. 10 years ago, around this week, because the conferences were usually held around this time of the year, was my first time that I came to Ankara. It's important for me. I'm a huge believer in cycles, right? And sort of like that we have these moments. And I always say that when it comes to my life and the way that my life has been lived in terms of travel and movement, I tend to live in sort of like 10-year cycles. And using that, well, no, like we all do, right? But so let me put it this way. I spent 10 years in Mexico City, moving back and forth between the United States and Mexico. The next 10 years, from my mid-30s to my mid-40s, I spent that time in between Spain and the US, and I spent a lot of time in Spain, primarily Madrid and Barcelona. And so for the last 12 years, I've been in Turkey. And usually what happens at the end of these 10-year periods is that I tend to say goodbye. So in some ways, this might be a goodbye. We don't know, because I will tell you why. It'll probably not be the same in my case. I will probably continue to return. So what I'm going to do is I'm not really going to read the paper that I was going to present. I was inspired by the presentation by Susan Straight yesterday about this power of storytelling. And so as a way sort of like, I guess, if I'm going to say goodbye, I'm going to say goodbye to Assad. So it was a way to say goodbye to coming to these conferences. I will talk about writing. But I'm going to give a shout out first. Help us with their labor, the students who come and support us always, who help us put together conferences as these, who sit in our classes and help us be honest in this dialogue that is learning. They learn from us, we learn from them. This is a shout out to the workers. This is a shout out to the many arrested and around the world for speaking up. This is a shout out for those who, as they discover that traditional forms of resistance are being cut back, find new ways to resist, to speak up. This is a shout out for my Latino and Latina community, the 50 million of us living, working, and contributing to the United States, demanding to not be sent back to live in the shadows. This is a shout out for those who cross borders. This is a shout out for those of us who live lives ordinary and less ordinary. This is a shout out for those who work towards keeping our stories alive. Above all, This is a shout out for those we have lost. For today is El Día de los Muertos, a day that is celebrated across Latin America, and for it is a day that we commemorate those who have left us, those whose lives that continue to live within us. So allow me to dedicate this shout out to my sister, Ana Vaquera Vázquez, who, though she passed away 7.5 years ago, continues to live on in my memories. And the fact that I've continued to come to Turkey is in part because of her. When we were children, we spoke often about traveling here. And when she was in her 20s, my sister moved to Istanbul for a year. And after that year, she dreamed of always coming back. Unfortunately, she passed away before she could return. And 3 years ago today, I was in Istanbul. And on Dia de los Muertos, I carried a small sample of her ashes. And some friends drove me out to the Bosphorus. And I deposited her ashes at the confluence of the Black Sea and the Bosphorus. And that is probably why I probably will continue to return, because my sister is here. John Philip Santos, in his memoir, Places Left Unfinished at the Time of Creation, writes, whether we're born north or south of the border, rich or poor, proud or contrite, we decide whether we will continue to abandon the often beautiful, sometimes terrifying stories of the past by small degrees, or against the drift, to remember, to salvage, to conjure, to resurrect them anew. So this too is an act of resistance towards being marginalized, towards having our stories forgotten, and an act of affirmation for those who live in the shadows, who work in the streets, who make our city splendid, who keep our movement flowing, and who create art, unafraid of the shadow that follows America, the shadow of fear of the other. Ricardo Sanchez once wrote, the poet, Chicano poet Ricardo Sanchez once wrote, who are we? We are the urgent voices. So this is a shout out for us, the urgent voices. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk briefly about a couple of stories that were important for me as a reader. What I always tell my students is that to be a writer, you have to be a reader and read a lot, read everything. He comes from a very working class Mexican culture, and Texan culture, especially working class Tejano culture, is very different from California coastal culture. When Lupe accuses him of being a product of American imperialism, Flavio responds, I don't have to dress in a serape and sombrero to be Mexican. I know who I am. At a dinner that Lupe makes, their conversations expose a wide social and cultural gulf. She talks of having her aura massaged by a curandera in Oakland, of Afro-Brazilian dance, of finding good dim sum in San Antonio, and quote, whether a white woman had any right to claim to be an Indian shamanist. Flavio talks of a friend from work, Alex El Güero, who won a stereo for listening at a radio station, of a tia, or an aunt, who makes the best tripe soup, ishkembe. He also talks about Johnny Canales and Mil Máscaras, the lucha libre wrestler. He shows her some dances, the tango, the habanera, el fandango, la milonga. But she wants to know if he could dance El Baile de los Viejitos, which was a Mexican traditional regional dance done in the pueblos. So Lupe's Mexico, idea of Mexico, is heavily laced with the stereotypes perpetuated in the media. And her Mexico is a folkloric myth. She's actually one of my favorite characters because of this, because too often we as Latinos, we receive our culture mediated through a mythology, through a creation of what we imagine Mexico to be. My mother recently had organized a birthday party for my sister, for one of my sisters, and she wanted to call it Una Noche Mexicana, which sounds great, that we're a Mexican family, of course we're going to have a Mexican night. Every night is Mexican night in my house. But for her, right, you had to wear a certain style of dress, the house had to be decorated in a particular way, and to me, that was very different from the Mexico that I know. But it was her own nostalgia, her own reconstruction, right, of what she imagined Mexico to be. So what she wants is she wants to be Mexican. What Lupe wants is she wants to be Mexican. And so when she falls in love with Flavio, she hopes that she can somehow become Mexican like him. And she begins to adapt her identity in a type of cultural reclamation by adapting her manners to his, as I said, in an attempt to be more Mexicana. But then Flavio leaves. He leaves her to return to Mexico, where he already has 2 wives. Lupe has been displaced twice, first from her Chicano lover, and then from her Mexican one. At first he is devastated, watching telenovelas and reading Vanidades, this is a magazine, but she soon begins to regain her composure and arrive at a sense of stability by working the painting, a famous Chicano painting of that looks at the myth of the creation of the volcanoes. If you took my classes, we talked about this image frequently, which is the Aztec prince carrying the Aztec princess as she is dying in her arms, and as she is dying in his arms. And this is an old tale, an old Aztec tale that explains the 2 volcanoes that are outside of Mexico City. That is Popocatépetl and Ixtaccíhuatl. Those are great words to learn to use at a party sometime. To astound your enemies and amaze your friends. Popocatépetl. Or as Cisneros calls them, Popo and Ixta. Right? So originally she meets Flavio because she thinks he will make a perfect Prince Popo. She wants to use him as a model. But after the breakup, she realizes she's distraught and she's bereft at this abandonment. And then she starts to rework the painting. And no longer is the painting of the Aztec warrior male carrying the female. It is now the female carrying the male. So the prince and the princesses trade places with the prince lying on his back in Lupe's version. In the space that is created by the leaving of lovers, she recreates herself. As she says, not Lola Beltran singing Soy infeliz into her 4 cervezas, but Daniela Romo singing Ya no, es verdad que te adoro, pero más me adoro yo. No more. It is true that I love you, but I love myself more, she declares. At the end of so with the arrival of spring, Lupe has reaffirmed her identity as a Chicana woman, living on the border, living for the day, as she says, with no thought of the future or the past, content to be. Now, it's a type of, in my book, one day I'll tell you the things I've seen, or many of the stories in the first series of books, all are about relationships. Like the book was born originally as a novel, even though I said earlier that I'm a man of short breath. This is why I write short stories. I conceived of a novel about relationships. And so when that novel fell apart, I took out the stories and I reconstructed them. I started thinking in terms of the stories that we tell and the stories that we cannot tell. And so what I'm looking at is questions of border crossing. This is what I primarily work on. But I wanted to reduce it down to the most basic sense. Right? The first border that we cross is the border between us, between you and me. How do we cross that border? How do we come to tell and share with another? And so, when I was looking at stories like Bien Pretty, or a story like Junot Diaz's The Sun, the Moon, and the Stars, right? I'm looking at these questions of characters that want to meet but cannot meet. They are lost and they are hanging in place. There is a certain affective dimension, and I'm glad that Dweepo mentioned this question of affect. Actually, I'm really happy with the 2 previous speakers because they're both grad students of mine in my seminar, so we're actually very, very, very excited. I had read versions of this work, of their works earlier. The other story that I wanted to talk about, let's see if I have time, is a story by a Mexican writer. Oh, I didn't even turn my plug. Do I have enough time? Sabaditos en la Noche. I'm gonna paraphrase it because the short story is written in Spanish and there's no translation. And in the story, it's a Mexican-American narrator who lives in Tijuana. He lives on the streets of Tijuana. He would be viewed by others as a bum, but he is a guy who has suffered a trauma. And his whole thing right then is to tell his life on the streets. So as I said, a lot of the people who work in the bar see him as an old crazy gringo hanging out on Avenida Revolucion, and he describes the street as, quote, and I'll translate it in English, a dirty straight line bordered by bars, pharmacies, hotels, cabarets, restaurants, and a ton of places selling Mexican curios. It doesn't have a church or a Red Cross to redeem it or to save it from hell when it dies. And then he concludes, come on, tell me the truth. Do we look alike or no? So this description demonstrates the level of affectation that the narrator has for the avenue. It's his street because it looks like him, stuck in an in-between moment. And what begins as a funny story told by an old man living on the streets descends rapidly into tragedy. He's abandoned his life in the north because his family was killed. We don't know how. He references it obliquely. But he bears the weight of their ghosts. He carries their specters with him. In a way, he's left behind one ideology, the American, and he's escaped into another, the Mexican, or the Mexican border, in a search for freedom from the personal trauma that has led him to Revolucion Avenue, where he performs his tragedy through his use of language. It's a humorous language that is laced with sadness. It is a stage upon which the specters of his past are presented. And I know I said this is a love story. It's a love story to Tijuana, and it's a love story to Avenida Revolucion. It's a love story too also to these characters who we often see on the streets, who we imagine as crazy old men, but who actually bear stories, and they carry their ghosts with them. What I often investigate is the enabling condition of storytelling to see how it creates a space or a ground upon which to understand the cultural consequences of, in my case, migration, or its forms of departure and its forms of return. I also often argue that the use of storytelling can function as a type of what Chicano theorist José David Saldívar has called pensamiento fronterizo, or border thinking, a practice that he says emerges from, quote, the critical reflections of undocumented immigrants, migrants, bracero workers, refugees, campesinos, women and children in the major structures of dominance and subordination of our times. That is, his type of border thinking speaks to a kind of wandering, as I've termed it in other places. It's a work that's a thinking that works to expose and undermine the coloniality of power that structures hegemonic control upon different communities. As Saldívar argues, quote, the coloniality of power can help us trace the continuous forms of hegemonic dominance produced by the colonial cultures and structures. And to put it another way, the coloniality of power is that which is said, to use a terminology of Levinas, a discourse or narrative imposed upon a community, a region, or a people. It's a hegemonic narrative. It's a hegemonic force. Oh, yes? No, wait. No, listen. Oh, yes. Enjoy yourself. Yes. All right. Here we go.
My friend.
Hadi bari ben de şeye geleyim.
Çok geniş oldu, alıyor mu?
Ne?